Welcome back, everyone. Today, as part of our core series, we are going to cover another significant event that defines the confrontation between the Eastern and the Western Bloc, and that will be the Berlin Blockade. Uh, I believe what Berlin Blockade signifies is the growing tension post World War II between the two new power centers, one led by the United States of America and the other by the Soviet Union, which was reflecting or representing the Soviet bloc. Uh, Towards Berlin blockade, the events leading to Berlin blockade holds a lot of significance, and somehow it was a test of the determination of both the blocks, which will definitely define the future, why things remained as they were from the end of Second World War. The world has seen so much destruction, but still they were ready to compete against each other in the most dangerous manner. And this period remained till 1990 when Soviet Union collapsed, and based on that, the Iron Curtain over Eastern Europe it fell, and then we have what we today see as the age of globalization. But getting back to a point, Berlin blockade, we will cover in this section. I recall very rightly that war and love, they are the product of misperception, or taking it further, miscalculation. So both parties in this case were locked in a ideological battleground. Now uh, our previous section, that was George F. Kennan's long telegram, that is a true reflection of how Washington and Moscow were seeing each other. And based on that, these things which were until now said behind closed doors, that came into a practical interpretation when it came to Germany. Germany, by all manner, was the prize. And the Red Army, after suffering immense losses, unimaginable losses, was the driving force which liberated the entire Eastern Europe. And when it came to Germany, same was the case, that it was leading the charge. And based on that, Berlin being the seat of the Third Reich, that held great significance, and that was taken by the Red Army, and and for that, it felt like from its past experience that a weak Germany under its control and a socialist color that it can give to Germany will be reduced to its level where it will not pose a threat to, especially to Soviet Union and the world peace. That's how they were viewing the situation. However, on the other side, the West, after seeing the destruction of Europe in terms of economy, and the way the Red March was conquering the entire East, and this coupled with the ideology of Marx, which was giving them an impression of inevitable war, never-ending war between the good and the bad, because in their perspective, the other was all imperialist power that need to be taken over, and through socialist revolutions, which by all means meant that there won't be any peaceful coexistence. So based on that, we ended up with Berlin blockade, and As we move on, we will define the steps which led to this episode. All right, so now we'll start with exploring the events that led to the Berlin Blockade, and we have the Potsdam Agreement. That's timeline around August 1945. Now you got to foresee this is a time when the world has just walked out of a nightmare, a war that has claimed millions of lives, and the fascism of Germany, Japan, and Italy that was over. And based on that, we were looking for a united world all across. However, the split was there. It was the two competing ideologies, as discussed in the last session. And owing to that, what you can say under the carpet, the tensions were rising. And in Potsdam Agreement, it was primarily decided that to keep a check on Germany from rising back again, being a nuisance from First World War and the Second World War. It will be divided into the four victors, primarily zones, as you can see broadly on the map as well. The four parties, you'll see the red reflecting the Red Army, USSR. Uh, then we have the Britishers, then it's the French zone and the American zone. And although we're not going to touch that, but primarily the fighting where the rollback of the Hitler's war machine started, that was from Stalingrad, and it was the Soviet troops, the Red Army, which was on the forefront, and that's why they got the real peace. As you can see, the white on the map, that was Berlin, and these uh, lines or occupational zone were broadly in the positions of where the armies were at the time of German surrender. So strategically, Berlin was a nightmare for the three Western powers. Reason it's around 100 miles inside the eastern zone by the Soviet Union, and for that they were always at a mercy, at a disadvantage, and that's how a Berlin blockade will play as we move forward. Now, there was a limitation imposed by the USSR uh, on the way the Western powers will reach their respective zones in Berlin. Now, the way the entire Germany was divided, the same was the case was within Berlin, with four zones occupied by each vector power, and they controlling them because that was the seat of power. And they had an allied council to look after these sort of things, the overall administration. However, having the strength or advantage of controlling the main territory, there was an there was a limitation that was placed on the Western power access to Berlin. Same was the case. They were allowed some three corridors to air corridors to reach out to Berlin, but initially it was too early. The world was already tired of any new military adventures, so this thing was not taken as anything strategic, just a temporary measure, as per most of the historians, and it went as business as usual, nothing much. However, not long after that, there were issues which were emerging, and that was primarily how the two blocs saw Germany. For Soviets, or let's say Stalin, to him what mattered was teaching a lesson to the Germans, something that will remain with them, and sort of a medieval idea that they will rip them off of everything, the skilled manpower, the industrial base, being transported back to Soviet Union to rebuild what has been destroyed, and uh, it was a revenge. That was the strategy of the Stalin, and the way they used to see Germany. However, on the other hand, the West, they were of a very different view. they wanted, by all means, for their large plan to succeed, a very progressive democratic Germany, which is able to spearhead the reconstruction uh, of Europe, and then eventually the world order is restored in their favor, and put a check on the Red March that had rolled over the entire Eastern Europe. So this issue remained, and the problem was there, and it emerged in one way or the other. And then we had elections in 1946, and this was the time when the Soviets had their first encounter with their policy. It's a one-man show when it comes to any dictatorial regime, and same was the case. This policy of imposing punishment on the Germans that really backfired, and the elections against all the adventures of the Soviet Union, including the formation of a new party, LCD, it didn't float, and they were really opposed by the German people. So we come across the events from that time, and we see how the Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov, in fact, he summed up the prize of Germany, that was Berlin, that not only Germany will be controlled out of Berlin, it will be the entire Europe. Whoever claims Berlin claims the crown jewel of Europe, and that will set the new order of balance of power. And for that, it was a zero-sum game on both sides. Not here. The same was the case with the Western Bloc. They were not ready to concede in any manner. Unified Germany, Americans were pretty clear about this thing, along with the Western power, that the Soviet having so much strategic edge in Germany with its military, and the support it is getting from its friendly governments in and around their German zone, it was simple that it will fall to the communism, and it will be a socialist Germany if it is unified. And for that, they have to come up with a uh, with a new Germany. It's more to do with what we call the Federal Republic of Germany, which has democratic and a progressive outlook, which Western power wants to be included in the world order, and for that they were towards the rebuilding. So this context remained the bone of contention between the two power blocks of what to do with Germany, and that eventually led to the confrontation and then the split of Germany into two states as we move further. So a lot started happening somewhere between 47 and 48. That's leading up to the June where the formal blockade started. And as reflected earlier, the unification of Germany was towards Western power. It was a clear signal that they will not have anything over it. And as Stalin would say, it has to be New Germany has to be a Soviet and communist. And that was a clearly drawn position from Stalin, and for that, this was to be countered by the Western Bloc by managing their reconstruction model for West Germany. And then there were a lot of administrative shuffles that were going on, like initially US and Britain, they combining their administrative zones into a singular entity called Biozone. And later on, France also joined the caravan and it became a tri-zone. Now you understand this thing, the victors, three siding on one side, merging and leaving one, which is the Soviet Union, on the other side. So the battle lines had been drawn at this hour. There was no second option. Only what needs to be seen is what will be the stakes, how far everybody will go. And this is where we lead to the Berlin Blockade. So, further, the divide came in the shape of the Six Power Conference that was Belgium, Luxembourg, Dutch, and the three zones which reflected each victor power. And that was to decide the future of Germany, and which will become their zone, West Germany, or as we know, Federal Republic of Germany. So that was the building block where it was all set, and it was clearly divided that the East now belonged to USSR, and this is the boundary. Anything coming towards this side will be seen as a threat, again translated later into 49 that we know as the NATO, and on the other hand the Warsaw Pact. So we will go into these events as well. However, this conference was important because Soviet Union, being part of the victors alliance and holding its respective zone of Germany, decided in the post-time, was not invited. So they were clear that it's no turning back at this time. And then it was the Soviets who had to react. And when Marshall Plan was formally introduced, and it was clear that this is not going anywhere, and we see in response to this Stalin coming absolute openly against the three Western powers. The council was dissolved, and General Vasily, he was the one who inquired about the outcomes of events like Six Power Conference and what was being planned. And upon getting an answer that it can't be shared at present, or the delegation didn't had enough authority to reveal what was going on, he adjourned, and the table of dialogue that were they were totally closed post this episode. And as we will move, things will get even more hotter. From the start of this lecture, we have told you to understand what was being what was the true cause of conflict between the victor powers in Berlin episode. It is the ideological and administrative orientation of the Western powers as compared to USSR leading the socialist charge. It was inevitable, and US President Truman, after the episode, clearly reflected these divides, that the four powers, there was simply impossible for them to jointly control owing to their differences. And this leads to the Berlin Blockade itself. All right, towards April, with the hostilities brewing between the two parties, including the formation of joint zones, bi-zone, little tri-zone, and the events towards the six power conferences, and Soviets understanding that something big was coming and need to be confronted. So the trains and other means of traffic which were coming into Berlin from the Western Front they were started to be checked by the Soviet Union, which was something which took the hostility to the new level. And first of all, when this started for a very brief time, at that time, General Clay, who was leading a U.S. Command, uh, he ordered the what is known as the Little Lift, where it was decided the military garrisons at that time will be supported via the air corridor. They will do the airlift, and another episode, tragic episode, is reflected as getaway disaster. This shows the level of hostilities between the powers. That one of the Soviets fight plane, it was in the western zone, unannounced, and it was making some very dangerous maneuvers close to the airfields which were used by the western powers. And what happened was that it collided with a British plane, and this resulted in casualties all aboard the British liner, which had around 14 passengers, including crew, and the Soviet fighter pilot. They all didn't survive this episode. However, this was taking the hostilities to a new height where we have casualties. But overall, post this brief blockade, which was to see the resolute will of the Western power, the Soviets were still of the view that this thing will not go long, because for them, US will revert back to its ideological background, and that is the doctrine of isolation, not to be in the dirty politics of the Europe, which was primarily colonial, and Americans, at least they oppose that. Uh, as per their historical orientation, they oppose this thing. However, they did maintain a lot of colonies in the past as well. So that's something which is uh, a matter of translation between the theory and reality. So, and they felt like the British Empire, already suffering on its legs, won't be able to do a confrontation. They were militarily outnumbered. If the Americans were not backing them, they were never going to rise against Soviets. That was out of question. And even if they do, it will be a piece of cake for the Stalin's Red Army to march on and capture the zones, which was to happen in case things didn't unfold the way it did. And then we had the currency crisis, and that has to do with the same thing, that the Soviets, they were all about punishing Germany in the worst manner, starvation, deprivation, and it was overprinted the previous Reichmark, and it almost lost its value. Even the barter trading was done through the exchange of tobacco, the cigarettes. That was such a condition which was really pinching the people of Berlin and overall in Germany. And against all hostilities, the West, they they introduced the new currency, which came into existence in June 1948. 18th June it was announced. By 21 it was formally there, and the West had already uh, ensured that enough supply was there, and once it came, it totally took the Soviets by surprise, and there was no response from them, and it became the trading currency. So this divide became a reality with this thing, and by all means, this is where the commencement of Berlin Blockade starts. So German post World War II, the prize was Germany, and within Germany, Berlin was prize. It was something which couldn't be lost by any of the four parties. So Clay has reflected in his words that the entire stance or credibility of United States, the free world, the Western power rests at Berlin. Whatever is done in Berlin will be interpreted all across the globe, and the stakes are too high. It's a zero-sum game. They just can't let it go. If it is a confrontation, that is with reference to the largest airlift operation that was done. Billions of dollars were poured into this effort to make sure the population remains progressive, prosperous, and uh, overall, it was something where the West showed its strength, and they pulled out something which was unthinkable out of this, and it remains one of the greatest episode of determination that we can come across, especially in the context of Cold War. So we've covered the reasons. Next lectures they will uh, feature other episodes evolving during the same timeline. Look after yourself.